A UAV hovers low overhead, and even a brief moment of target lock can transform what seems like a routine approach into an irreversible chain of events. Near Pokrovsk, the space between the front lines is no longer something troops can simply rush through. Snow-covered roads, forest edges, and even brief pauses become traces that drones can detect and exploit. In this type of warfare, danger does not come in waves, but as a constant, unrelenting pressure. Because the force controlling the low-altitude airspace determines who can move, who must stay down, and who is forced to break formation. So why does Pokrovsk become a place where every assault risks heavy losses before even reaching the defensive line? Why does this logistics and transport hub in Donetsk attract such intense UAV activity, turning every road into a critical life-or-death challenge? When a battle begins in a low-altitude sky, is the outcome still decided by tanks and infantry, or by the ability to maintain supply lines and control the approach corridors surrounding Pokrovsk? The Russian advance toward Pokrovsk starts as a problem of movement because the city lies near vital routes that feed and rotate units along the Donetsk front. Pokrovsk functions as a key road and rail hub, making convoy routes strategically important. Assault routes begin funneling into the few remaining lanes that allow armor and infantry to advance together. And these lanes matter because they connect staging areas to the edge of the battle. Snow and tree lines shape these routes since vehicles prefer firm tracks, while troops use cover that breaks enemy sight lines from the ground. From above, the pattern becomes clearer, as the same corridors are repeatedly used, and every slow turn or brief halt becomes a distinct marker. Ukraine responds early by deploying a low-altitude UAV screen. The first drones act like unblinking sentinels. A small aircraft holds a camera over the route, adjusting as the formation moves, turning a moving group into shareable coordinates. One drone monitors the main lane, while another scans the shoulders for a secondary element, creating a layered view that reduces the chance of a hidden flank going unnoticed. At this stage, the aim is not to create noise, but to gain certainty. Certainty that allows Ukraine to decide when the approach ceases to be a threat. As the Russian element closes in, the pressure intensifies due to timing. Being tracked forces decisions before the attackers even reach the defensive line. A vehicle slowing to avoid a pothole, an infantry file spreading across a road, or a brief pause near a patch of trees can expose the entire group, as each stop becomes a fixed point that can be revisited. Once the lead element is identified, the Ukrainian plan is to disrupt the push's rhythm, because tempo allows armor, infantry, and support units to arrive in a coordinated formation. When tempo breaks, units detour, spacing shifts, and the column loses its rhythm. These small disruptions can cascade into significant delays. Even without a visible strike, a tracked approach tends to compress behind obstacles, and such compression makes the route easier to map from the air. Near a logistics hub like Pokrovsk, minutes are vital. The attacker needs speed to seize openings, while the defender needs time to reinforce and keep supply lines open. This opening phase thus becomes a contest over movement corridors, where the side that sees first forces the other to move slower, more cautiously, and with less confidence. Once the approach is identified from above, the next phase targets the lead vehicles, as these set the pace and protect those moving behind them. When the approach is confirmed near Pokrovsk, Ukrainian drone crews shift from surveillance to active engagement, with the 46th Separate Air Mobile Brigade among the units tasked with this crucial work. Russian troops advance, with up to 4 armored vehicles leading the column, setting the pace and rhythm of the assault by carefully determining the lane and timing of subsequent actions in a highly coordinated manner. The lead tank plays a crucial dual role. It acts as both a shield that absorbs the initial enemy fire and as a guide directing the entire column through difficult, often treacherous terrain that may include narrow forest paths, muddy tracks, and snow-covered roads. Infantry closely follow this lead tank, relying heavily on it to absorb the brunt of enemy fire during the critical first minutes of engagement, which are decisive in whether the assault's momentum is maintained or lost. Maintaining continuous movement is vital to keep the attack coordinated and fluid, preventing defenders from settling into effective firing patterns that could halt or severely damage the advancing forces. Ukrainian defenders prioritize their targeting hierarchy meticulously. Their first objective is the lead tank that controls the assault's momentum and movement, followed by armored troop carriers, and lastly, the infantry that follows behind. Successfully destroying this armored spine exposes the rest of the formation, forcing slower, disorganized movement that increases vulnerability. A burning lead vehicle in such constrained environments can quickly block narrow roads, halting or diverting the entire column and creating significant logistical challenges. Recent incidents where burning vehicles caused over 20 Russian casualties and disrupted unit cohesion underscore why drone attacks have been heavily focused on disabling key vehicles. When armor is hit, coordination rapidly breaks down. Infantry loses its critical protection if the lead tank is immobilized, and the loss of troop carriers severely hinders evacuation and mobility, creating chaos within the ranks. Burning vehicles produce thick smoke that marks targets for follow-up strikes, while scattered debris further narrows passageways, forcing halts or splits in the advancing column. Radios quickly fill with urgent support requests. Squads scramble desperately for cover, and vehicles bunch up in vulnerable clusters. Recovery operations and casualty evacuation become extremely difficult, as towing disabled vehicles requires significant space and time, luxuries often unavailable in the heat of battle, while moving wounded personnel under fire adds a sense of urgency that further undermines order and discipline. Every minute spent near burning vehicles increases exposure, as these sites become repeat targets for precision strikes. UAV teams supporting the 46th Brigade exploit this vulnerability by maintaining relentless pressure with persistent drone strikes aimed at destroying critical equipment and disrupting the assault's organizational structure. The loss of the lead vehicle causes the assault to fragment into smaller, less coordinated movements with weaker support and fewer options for regrouping or counterattack. On constrained terrain near Pokrovsk, where heavy vehicles turn slowly and infantry must cross exposed gaps, such delays exponentially increase risk and rapidly sap the offensive's momentum. Repeated halts force commanders to rely on smaller probing attacks, longer pauses, and wider dispersal of forces, thereby reducing the chances of achieving a decisive breakthrough. With the armored backbone compromised, Ukrainian defenders methodically isolate and eliminate enemy fragments along snow-lined roads and forest edges, exploiting the ensuing confusion and disarray to inflict maximum attrition and degrade enemy combat effectiveness over time. Russian troops do not collapse all at once in a sudden, dramatic moment on the approaches to Pokrovsk. Rather, their breakdown often begins as a gradual drift into scattered pockets of resistance. After the initial contact, soldiers who had expected to advance with armored support find themselves on foot, moving along a snow-covered road and through narrow bands of forest beside it. The snow not only slows their movement but also limits their options, as boots and vehicle tracks funnel groups toward the same solid ground and narrow gaps between trees. What may seem like good concealment from the perspective of a soldier on the ground actually forms a predictable pattern when viewed from above. Since the edges of the road, tree lines, and ditches repeat regularly like map markers, soldiers try to use bushes, fence posts, and shell craters as reference points. However, these same landmarks also guide enemy drones, which often hover over terrain that naturally channels human movement. In many video clips, the route that appears safest is often the one most heavily used, making it the easiest for drones to predict and target. Thus, The forest belt becomes less of a protective shield and more of a narrow corridor. Consequently, the fight quickly shifts into a test of discipline rather than courage, because every additional step taken in the open creates a clear signature for observers overhead. UAV strikes exploit this visibility by targeting the simplest, most necessary action soldiers must perform, such as crossing a gap, stopping to regroup, or kneeling to tend to a wounded comrade. Each explosion produces fire and shock waves, forcing immediate decisions since nearby cover is often minimal and any movement afterward can expose the entire group. Some soldiers sprint into the trees, others drop into ditches, while some freeze, uncertain if the drone has left or is circling for another pass. This dynamic causes an assault formation to dissolve into separate, disjointed problems with no coordinated timing, as survival instincts push squads to act independently rather than as a cohesive unit. The most damaging consequence is the failure to maintain proper spacing. Groups that spread too far cannot support each other, yet those that cluster too tightly invite further strikes. In winter terrain, this trade-off becomes even more severe because cover is scarce and the white snow makes movement conspicuous even from a distance. When one group is hit, survivors often slip toward the nearest cover, but this movement creates a visible line from the air, indicating where the rest of the unit is heading. If the next group pauses under trees to catch their breath, that pause becomes a fixed point of reference. And fixed references are exactly what drones are designed to detect and exploit. Fires from burning equipment add another beacon, as smoke and flames highlight the path and help subsequent UAVs return to the same spot. This cycle repeats. Movement creates exposure, exposure triggers a strike, and the strike results in more chaotic movement. Medical evacuation becomes particularly risky in this pattern, because any effort to carry a stretcher or pick up wounded soldiers by vehicle requires a stop, which can be observed and timed from above. Units are forced to choose between speed and proper care, a choice that erodes unit cohesion as leaders lose control over where soldiers move and how long they remain in place. For commanders, reports become less reliable as radio calls increase while clear positions fade and map markers fail to indicate which soldiers can still move. A platoon may still exist on paper, but it can be fragmented into isolated groups unable to reconnect without crossing exposed ground again. The effects of UAVs do not cease when the formation breaks. The same pressure is pushed backward toward vehicles and the supply lines that support the next assault attempt. After the spearhead is halted near Pokrovsk and the assault line fragments, the fight does not remain at the front, but shifts deeper behind the contact line as Ukrainian drone teams move their cameras further back. In this rear area, targets include not only heavy armor, but also the logistical system that sustains future attacks. Vehicles transporting ammunition, fuel, water, batteries, and medical supplies must continue to use the same routes, while reserve squads require designated holding points for accountability and rerouting. Command vans, radio relays, and engineering trucks play a crucial role in maintaining unit coordination, especially when pressure forces units to disperse. Disruptions to these support elements manifest at the front line as silence, delays, and mistimed actions. Every movement leaves a trace, and drones interpret these traces as the beginning of a track. Even a single sighting can prompt repeated surveillance, as traffic often returns to familiar safe lanes. Precision strikes targeting deep mobility and timing are critical, because a delayed delivery can be just as damaging as a destroyed vehicle. Vehicles that deviate from main routes, pause under tree cover, or cluster near farmhouses may indicate temporary transfer points, not permanent bases, but recurring locations near junctions, cover lines, or the last sheltered spots before exposed sections. Once identified, these points become nodes in a chain, with drones regularly revisiting the same corridors to maintain pressure on the rear areas as if they were the front lines. The objective is to force Russian units to move in shorter segments. increasing the time spent waiting, listening, and verifying routes. Some units respond by dispersing and sending single vehicles, but this raises the number of trips and the risk that a single loss can jeopardize the entire operation. Others attempt to divert traffic onto rougher side roads, which slow movement and increase the chance of breakdowns. Some push repairs closer to the front lines, but repair sites require tools, spare parts, and fuel, thereby creating new fixed locations vulnerable to detection. Even a successful repair can cause problems if the vehicle must rejoin a congested route. When vehicles are damaged behind the front, Russian commanders must allocate more personnel to protection duties rather than maintaining momentum, assigning soldiers to guard roads, escort convoys, and monitor staging areas. Increased time spent on route checks and spacing measures slows the forward flow, forcing frontline units to ration ammunition, delay recovery, and hold positions with fewer reserves. This pressure also alters operational priorities, as units may wait for fuel before advancing or move before receiving full supplies, resulting in smaller attacks and more frequent pauses, making the campaign feel heavier and less predictable. Consequently, the battle becomes a continuous hunt across interconnected targets, where pressure persists, even when trenches are silent. A failed push at the front does not simply reset the situation. The stressed rear system requires vehicles and hours to rebuild. When daylight routes are monitored and attacked sequentially, the next question is whether darkness still offers a viable window for regrouping. Nighttime used to provide a planning advantage near Pokrovsk because darkness reduced the chance of detection before reaching cover. However, this assumption is eroding as UAV teams now combine night vision with thermal imaging, allowing the ground to remain visible even when the sky seems empty. Thermal sensors do not rely on light or fabric patterns, instead detecting heat contrasts and the outline of bodies against colder terrain. In winter, this contrast is often pronounced, as snow and frozen ground retain less heat than people, engines, or recently handled equipment. Even positions thought to be concealed can emit a glow when troops exhale heavily, weapons warm, or vehicles idle briefly. Operators also integrate thermal imaging with map data and radio intercepts, enabling rapid confirmation of faint signatures. Light drones operate in rotating shifts, maintaining near continuous coverage by quickly swapping batteries, drastically reducing the gaps attackers once use to move or regroup unnoticed. Equipped with advanced sensors and thermal imaging, these drones track subtle heat signatures even through dense foliage or cloud cover, making stealthy maneuvers difficult. Russian infantry adapt by moving cautiously near tree lines and wearing specialized clothing to reduce thermal signatures. But heat from exertion, breathing, and contact with cold surfaces remains detectable. Drones catch soldiers during brief pauses to rest, adjust gear, or check direction, turning these moments into liabilities. Nighttime has become a one-way observation window, allowing Ukrainian forces to track troops while remaining undetected, thanks to superior drones and electronic countermeasures. Troops are most vulnerable when halting, as fixed positions are timed and targeted precisely by guided munitions or artillery strikes, guided by real-time drone intelligence. Brief regroupings near trees, wounded comrades, or vehicles become visible, forcing continuous movement before reorganizing, increasing fatigue and logistical complexity. This surveillance causes physical losses and psychological strain. Commanders must push exhausted soldiers forward or risk another pause under watch, raising casualties or losing operational tempo. Medical evacuations become harder, as carrying casualties conflicts with the need to keep moving to avoid detection, forcing tough choices. Units that once regrouped after dark now break into smaller groups to avoid concentrated strikes but struggle to share ammunition maintain radio contact, and coordinate routes. Over time, discipline and confidence erode as silence and darkness no longer guarantee safety, with tension and fatigue lasting into daylight. Night operations extend daytime strain, and constant drone surveillance denies attackers the pause needed to recover, resupply, or plant. With aerial control day and night, Russia's ability to concentrate forces for holding territory or offensives diminishes. Near Popasna, battles balance assaults requiring mass and coordination against the reality that larger groups are easier to detect and target, creating a strategic dilemma. Clusters form to receive orders, refuel, or prepare attacks create predictable patterns, exploited by drones using repeated reconnaissance to anticipate stops and concentrations. Commanders face tough choices. Tighter control improves coordination, but concentrates troops in vehicles, increasing risk of strikes. The offensive struggles to maintain cohesion as units either disperse, losing synchronization and firepower, or stay compact and accept greater danger. This dilemma centers on tempo control. Disrupting enemy rhythm determines timing, initiative, and advantage. Meanwhile, Russia attacks Ukrainian cities with drones and missiles, targeting civilian infrastructure and straining resources during harsh winter. Kyiv officials report extensive damage to homes, hospitals, and utilities, with prolonged outages after major nighttime strikes, worsening civilian suffering. These strikes impose a separate tempo dynamic, as repair crews rush to restore power and emergency services remain alert for repeated assaults, often working in darkness amid ongoing threats. The link between battles near Popasna and Kyiv attacks lies in precise timing. Delays in frontline assaults or infrastructure repairs cause cascading operational and humanitarian problems, whether stalled offensives or freezing apartments. This dual pressure shapes national decisions, balancing investments in air defenses, engineering units, and logistics to support front lines in the home front, stretching capabilities and forcing difficult trade-offs. The competition's significance lies in protecting cities to ensure reliable logistics for frontline units. Policymakers must prioritize budgets, production, and air defense alongside battlefield tactics. Controlling low-altitude airspace is crucial, affecting ground operations pace and outcome. Combat around Pokrovsk shows that dominance of low-altitude UAVs shapes ground warfare by influencing unit movement, supply routes, and battlefield awareness. Constant aerial monitoring limits concealment, forcing commanders to assume they are always observed and adopt counter-UAV tactics, electronic warfare, and disciplined maneuvers. Tactical drones harass convoys and conduct reconnaissance, while long-range strikes target cities and infrastructure, stressing defenses and transport. The advantage goes to those who best protect supply lines, sustain production under pressure, and make swift, informed decisions amid constant surveillance. The conflict in Pokrovsk signals future wars will focus increasingly on low-altitude airspace control, shaping military strategy and procurement.